Who was the first episode?
No one. You're the first episode.
Why does it say episode 2?
Because the first one was just us talking.
Oh, okay. It was the New Year special.
Yeah.
And Jakub and Matti, and we were just bragging about our luck boxing.
About your trading.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I'm honored to be the first episode. This is cool.
We're really happy to have you as a first guest for sure. We don't even know who's going to be the next one. We have an idea about the people that we want to have on, but let's see. Maybe this is going to be totally terrible and we're just not going to release it.
Matti is very perfectionist when it comes to even like articles, spend months reviewing them before releasing them.
I know. Yeah. I've seen Matti's unpublished articles from 3 years ago.
Yeah. GMI.
First question that I wanted to get the conversation going was that I think it was Fisky who sent me the Crypto Land, Crypto Island video. And I know that, Steph, you've seen it too. And you made a great remark about crypto people being the last people you'd want to live with. And I totally agree. And you also mentioned to me in the past that you barely hang out with crypto people, trying to separate that crypto identity. And it made me think, and I also do not base my identity on crypto. So crypto is something I do, but for me, Matti does not equal this crypto dude. I told you that hanging out at Lisbon conferences end of last year, it became exhausting after a while. But we have Fisky here, and he seems like his crypto persona consumes a lot of his personality, or maybe it types, I don't know, but it's a nice contrast. So Stefan, a guy who doesn't want to engage with crypto people, I don't want to say at all.
Whoa.
No. You want to engage with crypto people, but it's not like this consumes you. And Fisky, a guy who really indulges in this character that he created. So it's a nice contrast. And maybe I said it wrong.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I have a prompting question for Fisky on this. Like, what do you think of moderation? What do you think of balance?
I was a huge fan of balancing everything in life. When I was playing poker, I was playing 4 hours a day and then I was offline and I was enjoying other stuff. But with crypto, I think it's different. I think Matti is right that it consumed me a bit. I'm trying to get back on track with my offline non-crypto life this year, but definitely last 2 years I was all in and it was a lot of fun. I think if you want to be really best in something, you kind of need to get consumed by it. You cannot just half-ass it. This is what I did with poker and I was good, but I was nowhere near best and I wasn't even trying to be. With crypto, it's such an entertaining, I don't want to say game because it's more than that, but from gaming perspective, I've never played any game that would be more entertaining on so many levels, social level, competitive level, even the amount of money you can get out of it, but that's not that important to me at this point of my life. Just the pure intellectual challenge combined with this huge uncertainty and ever-changing nature of it. When I speak with my friends who are non-crypto, who are, normies or no-coiners or whatever, I find it harder and harder to relate to them and things that they find interesting. Last year, I met some of my traditional finance friends, start fee friends, right? And they were complaining about their bosses, about how economy is dead. And they have super good jobs. It's not they struggle, in some blue-collar jobs and they are getting laid off. Nothing like it, but still they were bitching a lot and I was having the time of my life, at least career-wise. So I find it harder and harder to relate. And what they find interesting is very boring compared to the everyday drama that crypto offers. But after some point, it definitely can get unhealthy. You can lose track of what's important in life. I'm getting back on track with that, with my health and fitness goals and spending time outside of crypto. I think I talk too much. Maybe I would bounce the question back to you. I consider you one of the best in what you do in crypto, but you try to have this balance and you meet non-crypto people a lot. So what's your take?
Yeah, I think there's probably a big difference between what I say I try to do and what I actually end up doing. I think it's a perspective of just the knowledge of not wanting to get too deep into something becomes useful for adjusting and like making sure that you're able to maintain some perspective. Yeah, maybe I'll try to touch on the point about the crypto island. So I think it's mostly a question of diversity of opinions. Like I found over time, more and more of the crypto people, while they claimed to be visionaries, contrarians, and like thinking differently, it seems like a lot of the people end up thinking the same. Sort of do mental gymnastics to like justify their bags in one direction or another and come up with, value systems and ways of seeing the world can be like quite divorced from reality. And I think that's like what you don't need. Community, IRL, society, where you have to deal with stuff like who's going to pick up the garbage. You have to structure things such that people are like extremely willing to be altruist and help each other. there's just like some fundamentals, I think, of the way that the crypto community works right now that would be very difficult to actually live all together and spend time together. And like the reality of this party of affluence of everyone, making it together is very difficult to translate to the real world. So I think, well, on the one hand, 95% of my life is thinking, talking, working in crypto. I don't think it's like a healthy way for humans to live. And if it was the case for everyone, it would be very non-inclusive.
What's your biggest focus outside of crypto?
Sleeping? I don't know.
If you couldn't do crypto for 1 year now, what would you be doing most of your time? And money is no objective. It's not only a career question.
I like to read. So if I wasn't working, I would be reading. I would be trying to like expand my understanding of how the world works, things work, history, these kinds of things. Then I would find some other interesting problem to try to solve. I think biology has always fascinated me. That's a place that I could look into. The other one is fundamental physics and energy technologies. That's something that I might be interested to put my fingers in.
Non-crypto nerd stuff, right?
Yeah. I think so.
It's interesting to think about cost of socialization. How much does your engaging with other people damages you? I wrote this article about if you're new to crypto, these are the accounts that you should follow, etc., etc. It's just very simple way of how to understand or get up to speed with crypto. But then you realize that after some time you spend in crypto, and especially on crypto Twitter, you get too sort of zoomed in on things, and the chatter of the day kind of clouds the vision. And I wonder at what point this growth trajectory becomes diminishing or even has its cost on your ability to judge the visions of crypto or even individual projects in crypto.
Right, that's like the maxi narrative, right? Like how do people become maxis?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily becoming a maxi. I mean, you can still be agnostic, but just opportunistic is the opposite of maximalism, opportunism, or what is it? I don't think anyone of us here is maxi of any sort. Maybe you're ETH maxi, not in terms of your mindset, maybe in terms of your work engagement. But I think, in general, I noticed that Twitter is limiting my ability to see things beyond what is discussed on Twitter. And I always think that the best ideas come from isolation. So from people who are not definitely or entirely on the pulse of the day. And it's that freedom of not being part of the current blabber that allows you to come up with the great things. So I would even say that the biggest thing in crypto that in the future does not necessarily have to come from someone who is on crypto Twitter today. And that is something that you cannot, as an investor, that's definitely frustrating, because what's the formula to find that person? There is none, right? There's no process. How do we find this guy?
I have an idea. You can start paying people to delete their Twitter.
How would that be profitable?
You force someone to delete their Twitter for a year. You let them think through their project, remove some optionality, some distraction, and there's something good that comes out of it.
By the way, I got banned on Twitter for like 12 hours because I made a stupid joke with inverse bra and someone found it offensive and reported me. I could still read and send private messages, but I couldn't I couldn't retweet, I couldn't post and reply publicly for 12 hours. It was really good. I would like to have that option to be banned like this whenever I like. I still could read, I still could figure out what's going on if I wanted to, and I still could DM people when I want to be in touch with them, or there are some founders who are DMing me, but I couldn't do anything, any action on like public Twitter space. So that forced me to think less about what I'm going to reply or write and more about what other people are like writing, and then I spend less time there as well. So I think that was a great compromise how to consume Twitter, but it's hard to force yourself to do it. So this ban was actually a good thing, and I kind of try to figure out how to offend someone somewhere else in a way that I will get banned for another 12 hours. So let's see if I can find the balance between not being banned for too long, but just long enough to have my peace.
Twitter fatigue is real. It's very real. And I've toyed with the idea of just deleting my Twitter and just seeing what the crypto lifestyle without crypto Twitter is like, because it'd probably be way better, is my thinking. That's true. There's like a discovery phase, right? Where, you need to learn, you need to understand what the narratives are, you need to understand who the narrative makers are. And certainly Twitter is like a tool.
Especially you're a builder. And for you to looking at your peers to determine what's possible or what should be built, it's counterproductive, in my opinion. So if you've reached that level where you understand the basics, beyond basics, and you know the people and you don't have to engage with them in this public square, then you'd be much better off. Because when you look at others, you sort of end up competing. And I think that this is not the right way to go about building things. Do you do it? Do you go for it?
Maybe. I've certainly been like decreasing the amount of involvement that I put on Twitter. And I think the shit posting level has gone up, or like the shit posting versus quality. So maybe it's just a matter of time until I pull the trigger on it. I think it's interesting, right? Like it was certainly higher ROI having fewer followers. I think, Fisky, you've talked about this a few times, right? Like the Twitter experience, when you have a lot of followers, it degrades very quickly. And there's like not really much that you can do about it for some reason. There's something nice about just screaming into the void, saying my ideas, and I feel like they were way more meaningful. And now when like I'm screaming, there's always people responding. Like I can't actually put nuance or be mysterious anymore. Everything needs to be a joke and have a punchline.
Yeah. Definitely. I actually tried to decrease my follower count. I mean, it was a half joke, but someone suggested that I will post 2 tweets, one arguing for vaccines and the one arguing against vaccines, and then I will lose followers from both camps. But no, it didn't work. I stirred a lot of discussion underneath of each of those, but not many people unfollowed. I kind of feel that at some point people just start creating alternative accounts, alts, because even now, like I don't even feel like posting anything really nuanced and some deeper research, because there will be a lot of stupid responses and people who demand alpha all the time, and then they will kind of try to hold you accountable for your takes, and I don't know what else. It felt much easier to post a long thread about synthetics, for example, which was very controversial. The design is very controversial even today, and I was posting a long form research, and only people who were actually interested in the topic would engage. Now there are followers that are interested in other things, and they will just engage because you appear on their timeline and they don't have anything else to do. It's tiresome. I think you can curate it a bit. You can like mute notifications from people you don't follow. You can start doing stuff like you can take your account private. You can restrict who can answer to your tweets and stuff like that. So I will probably try that first. I will start playing with this more. But ultimately, I think creating alt account and restarting the social game from zero can be also interesting.
Also, if you use Twitter or social media more as an outlet for you to put things out there, it could be much more useful than to sort of absorb things. But that's more a utilitarian view on social media. Interesting thing is that, you two and sort of myself too, we've created this pseudo anonymous character on Twitter that carries on into other avenues. That would be maybe a question for you, Steph. Why Thegostep? What's the message behind it? How did you come up with this character?
Yeah, I wish I had like a good story behind it. I really don't. I think it was coincidence more than anything else. I think someone inspired by you all, actually. Was I anonymous when I met you on Twitter?
Yes.
I don't think I was.
Yes, it was Thegostep. I remember interacting with you around numerai, right? Or erasure. That was the topic. I don't remember what exactly with erasure or numerai, but it was already Thegostep, but you had like 300 followers or something.
I remember there was this request on numerai to create some art, something artistic about
That's right. Yeah.
And I created something really shitty and then tried to persuade people to pay me out on that. The one who created the request, which was Thegostep. And he was kind of on the fence whether it's good enough to reward. But then I think my second attempt was actually successful.
Yeah, it was like GIF of a garbage can, like with like some filters on top of it. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I think that was like early on in my anonymous online identity. And I just thought it was cool what you guys were doing to be these avatars on Twitter that are just shitposting. And I figured I would join the fray. I remember there was this like just thread where we're calling each other out about some random stuff. And it's just like an alien talking to like this, I don't know, Maddie, what your red icon is. And then Fisky's like, ghost. And then Fisky, you had like a completely different avatar back then, I think.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Hisoka already?
I don't think so. I think it was something else back then, but something cartoonish as well. So what's the story behind your alien?
I found it on Google. Like, there's no story.
But why alien? Why not, I don't know, frog or like, anime character?
I don't know. You just stumble on things on the internet and they speak to you and then you stick with it.
The alien became a alchemist, and that's pretty interesting. So you're adding bits to your character and it's becoming something completely new. And
it used to be dancing on its own, And then somewhere along the path, it picked up some gear, it picked up some baggage. So now it's got some alchemist gear and some robot gear.
You picked up some loot.
Some loot, exactly, on my quest.
Okay, so we've established that you were hanging around Erasure or Numerai, and maybe it would be interesting to explore the path that you had in crypto. Erasure probably wasn't the first thing, but it would be good to sort of explain how did you get into doing flashbots, focusing on MEV, because when we started talking, that wasn't in the picture.
I wonder if there's anything interesting I can share here that I haven't shared before. The story goes, I showed up to a random conference in 2017 in upstate New York at Cornell University, where I wasn't supposed to be and I didn't have an invitation, but I just walked in and started asking questions and tried to understand what was going on. I met Phil Diane, a bunch of other researchers from the EF and other places that were really working on the hardest problems in crypto at the time. The big topic was that we were like 1 year after the DAO hard fork, which like feels like an eternity ago. Like I haven't heard people talk about the DAO in a lifetime. But still back then it was like, is this going to kill Ethereum? Ethereum Classic was still around. And it was interesting just getting red pilled extremely hard by all these people that to me seemed like complete OGs in the space, but really had only been around because Ethereum had only been around for a few years, to learn from them. And I just dove in and kept learning from there. So yeah, I showed up somewhere where I wasn't supposed to, ask questions, didn't understand the answers, but committed to try to figure out how to understand them. Learned how to code some Solidity, got into the security side of smart contracts because I was just fascinated by the fact that there's no second barrier of defense. This developer that's writing the code is the only thing that's like securing hundreds of millions and not billions of dollars, and there's no recourse. Feels like high stakes programming. It's impactful and just interesting to do. So I got into that side of things, and certainly there wasn't that many people writing smart contracts at that time. So it sort of became easy for me to start building a career writing smart contracts.
I didn't really want to know how you got into crypto. I wanted to know more about why did you decide to obsess about MEV? What is so captivating about MEV?
I don't know. MEV is a weird thing. Like, I feel like I'm still learning about it every day. Like, my understanding is in flux. When I started Flashbots, I think my understanding of MEV was along the lines of you want to provide a better user experience for people who are using applications like Uniswap or something else, where you don't give the opportunity for a third party to violate the user's expectation. Maybe there's like ways to use the fact that you use in this, you work in a system where like information flows in these ways, and the information flows themselves has value to create a better user experience, whether that is, give the impression of having zero gas fee when you're transacting on Ethereum or others. That's really the starting point. I came at it from the how can it be used to build better applications? And the more I started building, the more I got into it, the more it became about somewhat populist narrative of showing strength to power from individuals, from retail and end users who in many ways I think end up always holding the bag or carrying the cost of the financial infrastructure that's built on top of them. They sort of are systematically losing just from having some power differential with counterparty that they're interacting with. It seems to be somewhat transitioning more towards that, about finding some ways to resolve those power differentials in markets that make markets more efficient, lower barriers to entry, etc. And it's turning much closer to how to think about monopolies, how to think about competition, innovation, and how they all relate to each other.
So is Flashbot going to be a monopoly? Are you building a monopoly?
I think the technology is somewhat inevitable to be monopolies, right? If you think about Ethereum, the way that Ethereum works, the Ethereum spec within the Ethereum ecosystem is a monopoly. Ethereum yellow paper that describes how the EVM works is, somewhat of a monopoly in DeFi. Many standards are sort of natural monopolies. Those are fine. I think those are good monopolies to have. I think it becomes challenging when you have monopolies that extract rent. Those are the kinds of monopolies that you want to avoid. Monopoly theory, I know, Matti, you're a big fan of monopolies, is somewhat tricky, right? It's as much political as it is like economic based. In reality, when you're swinging the hammer of antitrust, you don't really know what the impact is on innovation, on user outcome. What you're often responding to is some populist movement where there's some big entity that's serving as a scapegoat for some like wrong that is in the world. Usually it's like some financial crisis or some other thing. It's easy to like point the finger at some big corporate giant and say like, here's the source of the suffering. We need to make justice and break up this monopoly or whatever. So oftentimes that's how it actually gets expressed. But then at the same time, I'm a competition maximalist. Like I do fundamentally think that competition in the long scales derives more innovation, more progress than lack of competition. So yeah, is Flashbots going to be a monopoly? I think some of the technologies that we build, roll out, the standards, etc., are going to be like adopted by the protocols. And I think that's a good thing. They're like technical innovations that are adopted because they're useful. From like, is the company going to be a monopoly that like extracts rents? Definitely not. I think that's like the furthest it can be from what we aim to build.
I want to ask about MEV. I remember when I first heard about it and I started to dig deeper, I was really captivated by it. For me, it was a very interesting game, when all that buzz about Dark Forest and what you can do deep down was interesting because it felt very competitive game, but at the same point, after some time, when I saw all these galaxy brains piling into it, I knew that I cannot compete, so I basically stopped paying attention. And one more thing that kind of occurred to me was that it felt after some point that it's just another zero-sum game similar to intraday trading. And your point of view so far, if I understood it correctly, was more around the lines of how to use these dynamics to make better user experience. But ultimately, most of what happens in MEV space is just designing more efficient bots to kind of take advantage of it, to bribe miners. What do you think about this zero-sum aspect of MEV, or do you agree with it? And my other question would be, if you yourself run some bots to take advantage of MEV, if you profit from it on the side or within Flashbots, or if you just solely focus on solving this theoretical problem?
I don't run bots. I have in the past, somewhat like dog fooding, I guess, like getting to understand better what's like the user experience of someone who's trying to target MEV opportunities. I haven't done any like sandwiching or anything like that, but just like simple things like being the first to capture some like auction, right? Something like that. If there's like a new NFT that's dropping, being like the first one to capture. I've done that kind of one-off MEV. It gets really messy when you think about like what is MEV, right? Like just as a user trading on Uniswap, you're participating in MEV, you're creating value that can be extracted through MEV. Launching a token or like building pretty much any project, you're like contributing to MEV. I think there's like a specific subclass of actors that are these like highly competitive, value extractive, sort of zero-sum competition that targets opportunities and try to extract them. But it is not like they are the outcome of MEV. They're like a side, they're the outsprout of the fact that MEV is a thing rather than what MEV is all about. You're asking about the competition, the fact that like more and more of these people are optimizing for, minute things. I think in Ethereum land right now, that optimization is very much so around writing efficient smart contracts, going to like the low level of the assembly language and figuring out how you can save a few opcodes to be able to have some edge over the competition. I think it's not structurally healthy from the perspective of like, do we want to have all this brain power that's focused on this minute thing? But I do think that it's healthy from the perspective of like, this is the most efficient way to take the value that's on the table without disrupting the rest of the network. And so it minimizes the impact that capturing that value has on all the other users of the network. So I think that the social good still exists despite the work being somewhat throwaway, minute work.
I would go back to the statement on competition. You said that you're competition maximalist, that you believe that competition creates innovation. I would disagree with it. I think that competition creating innovation is a myth, because when you compete, you by definition end up just doing something what the other is doing, but trying to do it incrementally better. It's the romanticized idea of the struggle, but competition is about resources and innovation is about ideas that look beyond resources or give them new meaning or new powers, new utility. So I believe competition kills ideas, therefore kills the greater innovation or invention. So I think we would disagree here.
Where do you think ideas come from? Like, so you say you prefer that people focus on ideas rather than competition. Where does the source of ideas?
So that's the abstract thinking. I wouldn't call it randomness, but that's like the dichotomy in, or two sides of the artificial intelligence, right? You think the computers are getting smarter because you add compute, but they still cannot generate new ideas. They cannot explain why. This is where ideas come from. Just this isolated place that is abstract thinking. I don't know where they come from, but I'm sure that they do not come from competition. Maybe you're forced to think about, how to up the other, but you're definitely not coming from a totally different place. So I'm not saying there aren't good things that come from competition, but I think there are great costs to competition.
So there are like two analogies. One is, let's say, going to the moon, where, Americans did it in the 60s. I think that huge part of why they did it was because they were competing with Soviets during the space race. They wouldn't go there. I don't think they would throw so much resources because there was nothing there, right? It was not like, there is some natural resource that you can harvest or anything. There are, but you don't have the technology yet. But they still did it because they were competing with Soviets. But the other polar opposite to it, the first people who climbed Mount Everest, they weren't competing with anyone. They just wanted to be first. Maybe they were competing with themselves and with the mountain itself. So both sources of motivation kind of led to a similar result. I think maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle.
About the space program, I think Nick Szabo wrote a very good article about I think it's called How to Succeed on the Frontier, and he was talking about this Chinese fleet of the Chinese Empire back in 15th century or something, that it was just for show. It had no utility and it failed in comparison to commercial endeavors of Portuguese sailors. The space program or the space race wasn't a commercial endeavor. That's why we got to the moon. And what happened next? Where's the space travel these days? Today we have Elon doing something that is commercial and it seems to be working. Perhaps what we were doing back then was just to show there was no commercial aspect to it. It was just pure competition that led nowhere and had no meaningful results.
It was political competition, but Portuguese sailors were part of commercial competition or economic competition versus other sailors and other colonists. They were going there to bring back spices and other precious resources, and its free market is competitive, right? Maybe the nature of competition was different, but it was still competition. And all these European nations, they were warring against each other and competing, which one will be first, which one will bring more wealth back home, whereas this Chinese empire was a huge bureaucratic monopoly, and maybe that's why they didn't have as much urge to colonize.
Yes, you're correct. But Portuguese, in the time of internal European struggle, when you had this Europe and that was the world, and you were competing for more land within Europe, Portuguese decided to go out. It wasn't a competition back then when they decided to venture beyond what is the known world, or not known world, but the sort of competitive landscape back then. So they decided to go and pursue the seas, the oceans, and after they did it, obviously there were the Italian city-states that were also sailing, but they weren't sailing that far. I would say again, there was some internal competition, and Portuguese came up with this idea, okay, like, fuck it, we're not going to mess with them because we're small anyway, so let's go there. So they did not compete when they started doing it. I mean, then Spanish and Dutch and others went there. Now who controls the seas controls the world, right? So that's the competition, but Stefan didn't say anything about it.
And no, I love this topic. I want to stay on it. How would you apply like your frame of competition to like our current geopolitical realities, where the US is politically, how it's performing on like the global stage versus China, perhaps even throw Russia into the mix?
That's a tough one. Like, I try not to follow too much of politics, but from what we see, or from what I've heard, it seems like an era of failing empire. And, China is the emerging power that, competes and can compete because it has the resources. It doesn't seem to be the place where the ideas thrive. It was ideas coupled with the classic liberalism that allowed civilizations to thrive. So currently, I don't see any idea leader. It used to be Silicon Valley. It's not, and we're running out of a geographic place because this idea seems to be like the best place for ideas to emerge seems to be a place where there's less coercion, much more freedom. In US, you have freedom of speech to some extent, but you don't have freedom after speech. You get canceled, like Fisky. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I would say there is no specific geolocation that I see where the ideas emerge these days. But I see this cloud where some ideas are being generated. I don't know how to put it in the context of geopolitics. Maybe Fisky knows.
No, Jakub actually went back from California recently, and he was utterly shocked by the amount of shit on the streets and crackheads everywhere. And just we are watching it from afar, and Europe has many of its own problems. But it kind of feels like US is an empire in slow decline, maybe topping. I still remember this like old school investment advice that S&P 500 will grow 9% a year on average, like it did last 100 years, which is basically just extrapolating the historical trend into the future. But empires rise and fall, and kind of feels that US either needs to reinvent itself during some conflict and scapegoating event, or it will just be this like huge Roman empire that is mired in internal struggle, like it was during Neron and other crazy emperors. Maybe Donald Trump was a bit of a Neronic emperor. I like this analogy despite the fact it's kind of weak because every empire is different, but it kind of feels similar to me. And I even pondered this trade that shorting S&P 500 and longing ETH or something other that's emerging new trend that's global and not emerging just from US could be a good multi-year macro trade. I'm not sure. I mean, this is something that always happens over decades, not years. So it can be still premature to say that US is over or it's declining, but I wouldn't bet on it being the major top one or top three player in like next 100 to 200 years. Maybe it won't be. That being said, China, it's huge, of course, and it has a lot of resources, a lot of manpower. Technology is booming there as well, but they grew too fast. It was too sudden, and it kind of feels that right now they will struggle a lot with some of their hidden issues that we may not even know about. They can become at least short to mid-term victim of their own success, which was too fast, and there are a lot of problems there, and only the ones we know about are kind of big, some ecological problems and over-leveraged real estate market, and there are probably many more things hidden beneath the surface that we don't even learn about. It's such a different environment, and not many information leak outside, and if they do, they are kind of obscured. I would definitely bet on China rather than US if I had to choose, but I kind of feel that it's not clear what will happen next, and if there will be any major superpower at all that is like really global, maybe not. The chance of some smaller nations making their own stand via, enabling new technologies like crypto and deregulating them. Probably it's the best time for like smaller nations to build something on their own without too much outside influence in the history of the modern world. That would be my hot take without claiming any expertise in geopolitics. Stefan, you are from US, right? I'm from Canada, but
he's a panarchist, so maybe he could explain that. Why is he a panarchist?
Yeah, we can get into it. I think it's actually a good segue from the previous conversation. One thing that fascinates me and I love to understand better is socio-economical system. All the games that we're playing are these where it's a mix of scarce resources with people, and then they try to figure out how to allocate those resources and live their life according to some like set of rules, coordinate around these resources. City-states are this, DAOs are this. Anything that we do and any way that we coordinate are instantiations of this. Panarchy, it's two things. It's both a political philosophy as well as a framework for analyzing socio-economical systems. I think both framing of the term panarchy are underutilized in thinking. I think touching on the geopolitical thing, panarchy mindset tells me that it's natural for there to be bundling and unbundling of processes and economic structures.
Institutions, you can say.
Institutions, that's right. During the industrial age, the advent of the new technology, it sort of disrupted a lot of the ways that society was structured previously, right? Like capture the means of production, power to the people, like humanism, all sort of strives around that same time. At the time, it was a lot of chaos. You have a lot of fractionalization, free energy that gets released, and it's sort of a all-out war, all-out competition to try to figure out what's the best way to capture these new resources that are all of a sudden available. But eventually, there's some winner. There's some process, there's some structure that is more efficient than the others at capturing these resources. And I think, under this analogy, that would be liberal democracy. Liberal democracy in states have been more efficient and more successful at coordinating humans around scarce resources in like post-industrial age. And so they've sort of won. Now, the question is, do these structures survive a shock? Over time, structures become more and more rigid, and the way that the resources are allocated, the way that things are managed becomes more and more inflexible, which also means more vulnerable to systemic shock. And perhaps the information age, perhaps the internet is such a shock that triggers fundamental change in the way that we think about what is the optimal way for humans to coordinate around resources. The Panarchy sort of framework is that this is all a cycle. You have this cycle of, you have some shock that causes the incumbent monopolies or incumbent structures to dissipate, to fall over, to break down. And then you have chaos, you have free energy, where you have the most amount of independent, individual, competing parties who all fight for these resources. Over time, they start to consolidate, they start to find efficiencies, and there's a winner that emerges and becomes the new monopoly or power in the new paradigm. This cycle, I think, is probably what we're observing. My guess would be that we'll see more small countries emerge and compete and be like beacons of hope for civilization. And we'll also see large countries fragment, and we'll see like more separatist movements of subsets of countries that want to split off from the whole and compete on a smaller localism perspective.
You were talking about resources, like capturing resources. I sense a very political realism or utilitarianism here. But it's funny that you didn't talk about capturing minds, because minds rule supreme to resources. And you said that liberal capitalism was good in capturing the resources. It was good with capturing minds rather than resources that were then put into use after the minds were captured or enabled to generate ideas.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the minds need power. They need fuel to run, right? Like a mind is only as good as the freedom it has from constraints, the need to feed itself, to have a roof over its head. Freeing the mind, I guess, is like a winning strategy, but perhaps it also requires control of the resources to be able to do so. Yeah.
Kind of observe many of these crypto natives / degens who I know for a fact they have 8 digits plus already earned in like last 2 to 3 years. Their situation improved financially, but in their heads they are still captivated by this need to capture more resources and protect what they already have very anxiously. They are rich in the sheets, but not in the streets. They still feel like they need to compete in this zero-sum, scarcity-driven environment. So their minds aren't really free to pursue something other than just playing the P&L game. So is this something similar to what you talk about? Our minds still need sugar, and we need like hordes of sugar and other resources to continue. And even if we have too much of them already to sustain us for lifetime or near lifetime, we still feel like we should competing for more.
I think the model mostly applies at a macro scale when you talk about interpersonal systems. Intrapersonal, just like within someone's own life, the ability to adapt and change, maybe it's like a different frame of thinking would make more sense. It does like prompt a question to me, which is like, of all of these degens who went from nothing to having substantial capital, let's say like new minted millionaires from this last cycle, what percentage of these will still be millionaires in 5 years, do you think? 90% of them will still be, or people will just waste their money and they'll go back to where they were before?
So it's like with the lottery, lottery winners?
No, I don't think it's similar to lottery. I think majority of those that are here this cycle and like past cycle, let's say, usually you need, like, the saying is you need 2 cycles to make it, one to learn, one to really make it. Those who made it this way, I think they are actually fine. But the ones that just bought random NFTs and suddenly it's a huge thing and then they sell it and start thinking that they are godlike investor, I think many of these will lose inevitably, especially if they don't know the rules of proper bankroll management. And this is a poker term. Divide your capital to not risk everything in one basket and just manage it in a way that is not correlated. These guys will probably struggle, or they will have huge drawdowns, which are very hard for your psyche when you are already in a mindset that I already made it to sustain myself and my family, and suddenly you get a hit and then you start making mistakes. And I know this from poker. I know these people from poker. They won a big tournament because, I mean, they were playing well, but they were also very lucky. You need to be lucky to win a big tournament, even if you are a pro. And they quit their job. One of them actually went into his boss office and he did something stupid. I'm not sure what now. I think he peed in his trash can in the office or something like that and just told him to go fuck himself or something, and he's quitting his job. And then in 3 months he was broke and he had to go for unemployment support. And there are stories like this in poker. I think there are many stories like this in crypto, but I wouldn't say it's 90% of people. I think many of those, because it wasn't just, for most of them, it wasn't just one lucky hit, but multiple decisions they had to make and needed to orient themselves in the weeds. So if they are not risking too much on like very stupid small illiquid things, even if when they already like kind of made it, I think they won't go back to racks, but most of them will definitely see huge drawdowns. But I think that's not even that bad, right? If you see huge drawdowns, but you already know you made it once and it was your own effort, it wasn't just winning a lottery, it wasn't just pure luck, then you have this sliver of confidence you can do it again. I was reading about the rich people who lost the most money last year, and I was expecting it to be mostly businessmen who deal with stuff that got affected by COVID, and there were people like that inside of that list, but most of them were actually Chinese billionaires who got wrecked by Chinese government changing the rules. There was one guy who went from 10 billion net worth to like 1 billion net worth in 1 year, which is minus 90%. And it was because he had this online education business, but the Chinese government basically regulated it so hard that right now you cannot provide online education for profit service. It has to be non-profit. So this guy's $1 billion business just went, down drain. And I mean, he's still a billionaire. He still has like something like 1 billion. He probably took away somehow, but he went minus 90% in 1 year, which is even harsher than crypto. You need to be like fully allocated in a lot of illiquid stuff in crypto, or just be all in one project to see like minus 90%. This is a real world business that was booming for multiple years and had many customers. And I mean, there are drawdowns and huge drawdowns in the real world as well. Crypto is not so special about this. It's just that random people could do it from their bedrooms without interacting with outside world too much, apart from a couple of digits on Twitter. That's different.
I just wanted to say that it's a lot about what I see is a lot about positive expected value, right? This poker terminology somehow made it into crypto, and it makes you think about the optionality and how much optionality is good for the collective, and whether there's a trade-off for optionality on the individual level versus the aggregate. Just too much optionality makes it harder for us to come up with important things in crypto.
The biggest thing I'm curious about is how many of the builders are going to stick around. Now, I really liked all the meme within the builder community is like the bear markets are great. It's when you have the most amount of cohesion. It's when like everyone's just out there working on the tech. There's the most amount of collaboration. And then during the bull market, it's huge amounts of distraction. I think a lot of the builders end up leaving and they get distracted. They go work on something else. They start to enjoy life a bit more. They don't have the same passion and grind that they had when they started and they were learning. So I'm super curious to see how many builders stick around. There's always a new crop that comes up, right? And they take over, and usually it's always more people. At the macro scale, I think the industry will be fine and there'll be sufficient builders. It'll just be a completely new set of people.
I think the graph from the recent report from Electric Capital showing the amount of Web3 developers, quote unquote, it showed that there was a decline after 2018 and then it peaked again, I think. Now we're at the highest. That's not necessarily a great sign. concerning, because what I see these days is huge seed rounds that are not in like lower millions, but they're in tens of millions of dollars. And it makes you wonder if that is necessarily good, or it's just trying to throw more resources at the same thing without some breakthroughs. That's concerning, because who is the most remarkable builder of the bear market, the last bear market? The poster boy for this is Hayden from Uniswap. Funny thing, I'm actually writing about this currently. I, for the fact, know that Gnosis had XYK AMM built early 2017. They coded it, but they never took it to market. And then a year and something after that, this random guy coded this thing to life. It wasn't even his idea. But Gnosis, they had so much resources already 2017. It was a force. They had a huge ICO. They managed their treasury well. They had a lot of money, a lot of brightest minds. And this random guy coded a thing that they built before, without even knowing it. And this was one of the biggest innovations of that time that led to DeFi summer, etc. But Gnosis could have done it. They had it, but they had too much optionality, too many resources to be obsessed with and build something else, whether it's a prediction market or Gnosis Safe or, bunch of other products that work. Don't get me wrong, Gnosis is a powerhouse. They're one of the brightest minds in the space. Just look at it. They had it before. They had the resources, but it was this guy without no prior knowledge that did it. So it's not necessarily about the amount of developers and about the resources. It's about one guy doing it.
Yeah, you think they were just distracted? They couldn't focus. They couldn't prioritize. They couldn't pick one thing. Is that what you think is the reason? Or they picked the wrong thing?
I don't know. I'm not saying that they picked the wrong thing. Like, they're out there building, different things, swap, whatever. They're just contributing, right? Doing a lot of research. So I'm not saying they did something wrong. I'm just trying to point out that, sometimes it's about the urgency and the commitment to execute on this one particular thing rather than having overwhelming amount of resources at your disposal. Because in that respect, it's optionality. I mean, definitely serendipity played a role there, but it's not about resources, I think. This could be just, I could cherry picked an example, but I think there's something to it. And even if the amount of builders would be less in the space after, say, there would be a terrible bear market, I don't think it would be necessarily bad. I think that the more resources, the more chatter about price, etc., the more people focus on one thing. I've written about it, right? It's a convergence of ideas, like we're just doing this one thing, so everyone building NFT marketplaces these days or just DeFi protocols. And when there's not that much chatter about one thing, people go explore. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we should just cancel all of crypto Twitter. Let everyone explore.
Yeah, maybe this prolonged bull market wasn't that great. Maybe it could do more damage than good. Who knows? Fisky doesn't agree.
Everything is as it should be, I think. Like, Twitter is great. I mean, it has a lot of downfalls, but I think it's net positive, not only for me or like Z Prime Capital personally, but also to the space in general, because all the vitriol and all the zooming into the drama of the day and focusing on bullshit, it provides very large and pretty open and transparent discussion forum for crypto natives to fight it out in debates and conversations and shitposts and bond together socially, which I think is also important. If we accept the thesis that crypto is a lot about forming these digital tribes aligned around some digital values or digital valuable assets, I think that something like Twitter is necessary for it to work in like a semi-healthy and semi-efficient way. And if there was no Twitter, we would have to invent it. That being said, I kind of feel that we should try to create something new better than Twitter, where we can own our social graph, where we cannot get banned easily or at least cancelled in a way that takes a couple of years of work and social connections away from you. That's actually pretty high risk for people who make their living via being connected to other clusters online.
You would agree that it goes out to moderation. I'm not saying Twitter is all bad, but it goes down back to the question that Stefan posed originally, moderation, right?
Like everything in life, of course, but I think it's naturally being moderated by not on individual level, some people will always overdo it, but on collective level, there are people who are already zoning out of Twitter. Like Stefan said, he is tweeting less, he's shitposting a bit more and engaging in serious conversation a bit less. So I think there is this like natural life cycle of a Twitter addict. There are new people coming in who are still learning the ropes. There are these degens. There are some people who will still be addicted to it even like 10 years. But I think naturally it will reach some sort of equilibrium where it all makes sense and some people get burned out out. Some people are addicted, but some people learn to start to fade it more in a way, or start to pay less attention to it. I kind of feel that trying to preach moderation or be this high horse guy, it doesn't make any sense. People will learn themselves what is important to them. I think without Twitter, crypto would be much worse. Even the progress would be slower, because now we exchange ideas pretty fast and we connect to people via Twitter that we wouldn't be able to connect to otherwise. And it's not only about connecting to people, but also about this social track record or reputation, which is much harder to track via other media. When you had only like private chats with people and not this public forum, you would probably have harder time realizing who is in it for the tech, who is dumping on followers. I actually, thanks to Twitter, I have a pretty good picture of who to trust, who kind of avoid, or who is a counter signal. If I was chatting with these people maybe only via DMs without seeing their public takes and public discourse with other people, maybe I wouldn't have such a full picture of it. I think, yeah, you are right that, of course, moderation in everything, but people will naturally, in aggregate, moderate themselves. You don't need to be the force that tries to ban Twitter or shut it down or anything.
I would want to ask, what do you think, Steph, is the next chapter for crypto, or what you would want it to be?
Oh, those are two very different things. I mean, another crypto trend that I'm seeing that I think is pretty exciting, I would say, it's certainly like shaking a lot of things up, is these like worthless governance token being sort of a thing of the past. Protocols needing to like ruthlessly aim for generating cash flows, otherwise just like getting forked, and by like a team that is happy to be ruthless about it. It seems like it's going to have quite an impact on the way that teams think about building and how they think about what structures to build under. Do you build in the US? Do you like build abroad? Do you build only Anon? There'll be like a shakeup, I think, in the way that teams approach this. I'm fairly bearish on anyone that's building things in the US. It seems like there's going to be like a huge wave of regulatory action that's going to take hold, and it will be like increasingly tricky for those teams to build anything. Where do I want things to go? I really don't know.
Let me put it this way to make it easier for you. Say that you completed your work with Flashbot. Say that now everything would be done and you wouldn't have to worry about it. You've solved the problem. You would still want to do something, right? And it would be today. And it would be something from scratch. And it would be probably crypto. What would it be that you would be building?
Yeah, that's where my mind went to as well. I think I'm so currently focused on what I'm building that it makes it hard to like look beyond into what are the new opportunities. I always get back to the same premise if I'm trying to figure out what to build, which is what are users begging for right now that they're not getting? What is the experiences or like the tools that they wish they had to be able to have a better experience using all this technology, and then just build those. And then even if they're not like a business, even if they don't have a token, it doesn't really matter. Eventually there's something really interesting and powerful, some new innovation that gets discovered from that process. You know, it doesn't give you the answer, but that's how I think about how to direct my work.
It's very interesting because you're very much focused on what you're doing. It's thinking about utilities, etc., and being as a utility of what you're building, right? A very sort of structured thing, very analytical. But then again, sometimes I remember this, I don't want to say catchphrase, but this word that you use, and that's aesthetics. It's the opposite of the utility. And I came across a quote that made me think of you. And it goes like this: put usefulness first and you lose it. Put beauty first and you'll do what will be useful forever. So it's basically saying nothing is more useful than useless. And that's very interesting to me. What would you say about this?
I like that you're keeping me accountable to the things I've said in the past. I'm just trying to make it up as I go here. And then here comes Matti, who's like, yeah, well, you said this, and now it means, you know, fundamentally, I guess we're all on a journey, right? And I'm as susceptible as anyone else to like go in one direction and then overcorrect to go back in the other. I do think that there's extreme value to aesthetics. And in particular, I think aesthetics is something that people feel like strong meaning to, much more like meaning and like natural connection to than any like explained meme that we can have, like financial freedom. It's a great meme and like people will connect to it, but they won't fundamentally connect to it the same way as they would to aesthetics. So I think there's like some truth just from that emerges, that like if you optimize for aesthetics, you optimize for truth, you optimize for scalable things. It's very abstract and it's very difficult to like, what does maximizing for aesthetics mean?
How do you optimize for aesthetics in crypto, or specifically on what you are doing?
I think the decision of like creating an Anon account is an aesthetic decision in many ways, more than a utilitarian one. I think the way of presenting a project, not refusing ruthlessly to do like paid advertising and these kinds of things, is as much an aesthetic decision as it is like branding decision. The way that you speak about narratives and the way that you sort of present memes as conversation topics is all aesthetic decisions. So I think it comes up, a lot. It comes up in all kinds of decisions. It's an intuitive thing, I guess, and like people will disagree on like what is the aesthetically right thing to do. Yeah, it comes up everywhere.
Yeah, maybe that's the answer to the question about where do ideas come from. Maybe they come from aesthetics. Wouldn't that be beautiful?
I'll say yes, just so we can tie it up nicely here.
I want to ask you, Stefan, I don't see any hot take about Olympus on your Twitter, and these days everybody needs to have one.
Oh, this is a sensitive topic.
Let me explain why it's sensitive, just very briefly. I sent it to Stefan like a year ago when we were doing the seed round in Olympus. I was like, what's so remarkable about it? Like, what do you see? I was like, I'm not going to explain it. That's the origin of our shared Olympus story.
I think Olympus is like by far the worst trade I've ever done. And so it's a sore topic. At the same time, like I think it's fascinating and I've learned a ton from the way that it worked, and actually seeing a lot of other projects have similar mechanics and seeing them implement it gives, I think, an interesting way to apply like where we see this type of bootstrapping model go. I think there's a lot of project that looked at Ohm and said, wow, what a great success. They've been able to bootstrap a huge amount by having some focal point on price and having some like mechanism to be able to bootstrap price. But ultimately they'll need to figure out like when's the stopping point? When do you like call the gig off? When's the Ponzi, over, and what do you fall back on? Is this like fallback actually built already, or is it still like a hope of having some fundamental, some cash flows or some other structure that's able to support a certain price level? There'll be a lot of other projects that have a similar downfall, but there's still like a lesson learned for teams that are looking to bootstrap and like where really they are constrained by attention. They have good fundamentals and price and social awareness is missing.
To that point, I mean, it's not about Olympus anymore, but once you tweeted that inflation is one of the greatest technologies or something along those lines. And I understand what you mean by that, but people probably don't. So can you explain it? And does it have to do with anything with Olympus at all or with crypto in general?
I think I'm high conviction when I say things, and like I back it up. All the projects I'm involved in have extremely high inflation. I think I see the reason I do it is to test the limit of my theory. I want to figure out, is this always true, and like true to what level? What are the trade-offs in this like new design space? What impact does it have? I can try to like explain why the rationale for that justification, just within the context of crypto project. Let's ignore real world monetary policy and instead just stick to communities and like shared ownership. Inflation provides a vehicle for transferring value from early members and early contributors to later arrivals, and allows for this ecosystem to continue bringing on new talent, new members who have credible way to make it. It's a machine for continuously attracting new blood, if you will. A lot of the projects in crypto start extremely small, tiny community, and then you're with an idea and you start building it, and then you get discovered, and then like overnight the project goes 10,000x, and then all of a sudden everyone that was super early are massive bag holders, and they either decide to stick around and hold all their positions, or they offload. And I think inflation in many ways forces that decision, right? It says you can hold on to your bags, but it's just going to be like continually diluted away. And so you have to like make a conscious decision, like force the huge whales to exit and allow for some stability to come back to the system, like allow some new people to come in, get excited about the project.
But there are many other aspects to this challenges for your thesis to work. Because a lot of projects have inflation, meaning there are new tokens being constantly created and diluting those that don't do anything. But then again, it's like usually in most projects I've seen, it's super easy to do something that protects you from dilution. Usually it's just staking and maybe running a validator. So in layer 1 networks, at least there is a risk of slashing. So you need to put some solid infrastructure in place and kind of monitor it. So there is already work you need to do to be protected from dilution and earn fees, of course. But there are many DeFi projects where there is like big inflation, but you only need to stake the token to earn the inflation rewards yourself, and then you are protected. So it doesn't really solve this problem of ossification of ownership. So you still maintain fixed percentage of the supply, despite the fact that there is a big nominal inflation going on. What are the projects that do it differently, or do you have any examples of projects that don't have these mechanics that actually protects you from inflation pretty easily as early backholders?
I think there's one model of inflation which is interesting, and it's one of perpetual growth. I think you're right. People have sort of ticked in that you can use inflation to incentivize certain behavior, but they don't necessarily model like how much of that behavior they want. They just like assume like more is good. And so it gets to the point where it's like way beyond what the system like actually needs. And then it's waste. The inflation is, I see it somewhat as like a tool that needs to be invested. You invest in coordinating people to do a certain activity, and the need of like those activity changes over time. I don't know that there are any projects out there that have done this extremely successfully. You can build pretty much anything using this framework. And the crazy thing about it is you can fund anything without really having the need for like venture capital or like sophisticated investors that you like negotiate with, because the capital that you have to invest comes from the network value, right? From the inflated supply. So there's this tricky thing where the more discretion you have over how the inflation is used, like the more risky it also is for the project, and like somewhat like the more control that whoever controls the inflation has over the fate of the project. And that might like make people uncomfortable, particularly in our microcosm and the way that DAOs are thought of today. But at the same time, it provides a lot of flexibility for adapting to new realities and directing the capital in new ways, using it for funding new experiments, using it for funding public good, using it for investing in other teams, other projects. These are all ways to use inflation in a way that if you have a fundamental thesis for how it returns more value to the core project, it can have a very potent and powerful impact.
I want to say that the reason that I liked you, or we liked you early on when you had your 300 followers and just chosen your dancing alien as an avatar, was that I noticed that you had a trait of asking good questions and not being, too quick to answer. I generally notice that you prefer questions to answers and being more comfortable asking. And I think that's a great trait for a builder to have. I like the aesthetics of it. That's why I think this was a really good conversation that I really enjoyed.
Oh, well, thank you. And I hope it's not the last. I think there's so many other topics that we can cover. And so I always super enjoyed talking with you guys.
Any last words? Any last piece of alpha?
Yeah, that's pretty somber. No last words. Yeah, see you all in the metaverse.